Hi everyone and welcome to my channel and to this time-lapse version of a large painting of a cheetah. It's my first time painting a cheetah and you're about to see that it's not such an easy animal to paint. I hope that you enjoy this speeded up version here on YouTube. If you'd like to see some full-length tutorials from this one, then do check me out on my Patreon channel. I'll add links in the description below. So this is another project that I agreed to take part in. It's for Africa Wildlife Art, who are using some artwork to raise funds for lots of different wildlife projects, conservation projects in Africa. So I've already completed one painting. You might have already seen it on my channel here. It was the Ethiopian wolf. And this time it's another first for me, with a beautiful cheetah in a sort of jungle setting, which is quite unusual to see a cheetah that's not on the safari plains or with more orange tones behind it. I really was drawn to this image because of the depth and the darkness of the background and the lovely green colours coming through. So I start with the background as always. I want to get those dark tones blocked in all around the cheetah so that when it comes to working on the fur, all the little edges of the fur will sit nicely on top of the background. If you're interested in learning more about painting backgrounds in particular, that's something that I cover a lot of on my Patreon channel, and you'll find a few videos here in real time on my YouTube channel as well. But I love to create the full scene, so backgrounds are something that I love to work on. But of course, the main focus of this piece is the beautiful animal itself. And there's no avoiding all of those spots. So the first thing that I do is get all of them blocked in using a harder black pastel. I'm using mostly my Unison soft pastels, but I also use a little bit of harder black pastel in almost every painting that I do. And because this was the first spotted animal that I've really painted, I wasn't too sure how to approach this. So my initial thought was to get all of the spots blocked in so that I can work the fur around the spots. And of course, each spot isn't completely round. Each spot is slightly warped in perspective as it describes the form of the body of the animal. So it's important to get the spots going off in the right perspective, more than it's important to get every spot in exactly the right place. Of course, you can differ a little bit to the photo reference when you're working on something like this. But what I'm really looking for is how those spots describe where we are on the body, how they wrap around the overall shape and form of the body is important. So as I start to fill in the colour around the spots, the other tricky element to the photo reference in this case was the dappled light. So I've got some areas where there is shadow being cast on the coat, and of course that makes it a different colour in those places. And I've got to keep my brightest highlights for where there is some of that lovely sunlight peeping through. I'm presuming it's peeping through leaves and trees. So in each part of the cheetah, I try and block in the dark areas first. And in this animal's case, of course, that's the dark black spots. And then I just work my way up through the tonal values, filling in the gaps in between the spots mostly. One of the things that really drew me to this reference image was the light and shade. And I particularly liked how that happened on the face. So we've got half of the face in the shadows, and of course that means using a different palette on the shadow side of the face. This is something that I talk about a lot in my tutorials, how to create light and shade as to me it's the most important factor of creating something that looks realistic. If you can identify the light source and what direction that's coming from, then it's vital in your painting process to think about the difference in colours that you're going to use from one side to the other. So I'm using lots of blue-violet on the white areas in the shadow side, and then coming in with pure white where those parts are in sunlight on the other side of the face. And it's as simple as that, all about attributing different colours to different parts of the animal where it's being affected by the light differently. So if you're interested in seeing some of this in real time, I'm going to do a very in-depth tutorial on the face of the cheetah. I will release lots of the footage in real time so that if you want, you can watch much of this painting come together in real time. But I'm going to at least release the face of the cheetah with colour codes and full narration giving you step-by-step guidance if you'd like to do a little close-up portrait of the cheetah's face along with me. So I'll add links in the description below to where you can find me on Patreon, and also to where you can have a browse through all of my existing tutorials on there, as I've got tons of other tutorials, whether it's animal portraits, both domestic animals and wildlife, as well as people portraits, landscape. I try to do a little mix of everything. So I'm always happy to get a face in someone looking back at me. And with both of the pieces that I've created for this Wildlife Foundation and this fundraiser, the animals have been really staring out from the picture. So it's not always that you get an image where the animal is making eye contact with you. But it seemed to be that both of the images I chose for this were like that, with the animal really staring you down. So there's an intensity to the gaze in both of the pieces that I've created for this. Those pieces will be going on sale in June, and that's June 2022, in case you're watching this video at a later date. And if you're interested in purchasing either of my pieces, then you can check out Africa Wildlife Art on their Instagram page, and you'll get updates there on when these pieces are going on sale. And there'll be a huge range of other artwork from some really well-known artists. So it's definitely worth checking out. So working the rest of the body, there's a lovely patch of shadow that's coming across the body here. My first layers of colour almost cover over my black spots. And then it's just a case of going back over the black spots and strengthening those again. So it's quite satisfying to work on, extremely laborious. But once I got into the flow of it, I really enjoyed this. It's also quite a large piece at 23 inches tall. So the body of the cheetah is quite large within the composition. And it definitely took me many hours dealing with all of those spots. It's not something I'm keen to repeat anytime soon, but I did enjoy the process, and as I progressed through the piece, it became more and more satisfying to work on. So I think half the battle sometimes is just to persevere through those early stages, get to the point where you can start to get into the flow of the painting. But sometimes it's tricky just to get over those first hurdles and stay patient with it and keep your focus with it. Again, something I'm always talking about in my full-length tutorials. just about the mentality of working on a larger or more complicated painting. It's good to give yourself small projects in between the bigger ones, but I also really like to challenge myself with larger paintings like this, where it takes all of my patience to stick it out until the end. So again, there's beautiful dappled light coming down the legs. And it's just the same process as before. Always making my marks, trying to go with the flow of the fur, as the flow of the fur really describes the form and the shape of the animal. So definitely my favourite part was adding in the black spots in the end, just strengthening up each spot and seeing each limb come to life. So another element to the reference image that really attracted me was the fact that we get a bit of water reflection at the bottom of the piece. So it's definitely a more unusual setting for a cheetah. But I really liked the idea of repeating those lovely spotty legs in the water reflection down below. As well as that, some of the lovely greens from the leaves in the background also getting repeated in the water below. And water reflections is something that I love to paint. It's much more simple than it looks once you get the formula right. You can do it much quicker than you did what's above the water line. You can work a little bit looser in the areas of water. As you'll see with the legs, that I don't have to add quite as much detail in those. But a water reflection within a painting can look so good. And I always love when that's part of something that I'm painting. Again, I've got lots of tutorials all about water reflections on my Patreon channel if you're interested in learning how to incorporate that into your painting. But I hope that you've enjoyed seeing this come together. It's been a challenge, but also a real joy to work on my first ever cheetah painting. And I have all my fingers crossed that it will raise some much needed funding for this wonderful cause. Again, I'll add links below where you can visit me on my Patreon channel, and also the link to where you can follow Africa Wildlife Art and find out more about the sale of these paintings. But thanks very much for watching this here, and until next time, happy pasteling.